From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, I'm Carla Gonzalez, and this is From the South. People in the Guatemalan town of San Antonio de Cortés said their final goodbye to Jacqueline Cal, the 7-year-old girl who was a migrant and died in U.S. custody earlier this month. Jacqueline was laid to rest on Christmas Day after her body was returned from the United States. Previously, relatives and neighbors held a wake for the girl. Jacqueline's death raised many questions about how migrants are treated at the hands of U.S. immigration authorities. Our correspondent in Guatemala, Santiago Botón, was at the funeral and brings us more.
Saludos, colegas y amigos televidentes.
Yet another burial is carried out as a result of migration. This time, it's for Jacqueline Rosemary Cal McQueen, the 7-year-old indigenous Mayan girl who died under the custody of the Border Patrol Agency in the United States on December 8th. She was buried on the afternoon of the 25th because it symbolizes the sunset of life as it is interpreted in Mayan culture. Her wake lasted 24 hours and was held in the home she left over a month ago. According to Santiago Putul, one of the people I spoke to during the funeral, the child's death came only after her father tried to run away from the misery and neglect this community suffers at the hands of the Guatemalan government. One of the Catholic ministers who attended the funeral, Juana Tot, also told us that extreme poverty sentenced the child to one of two painful destinies: death or becoming another teenage mom, a story that's very common for children in neglected areas such as this.
Santiago Botón from Guatemala. And another migrant child has died under the custody of U.S. government after being separated from his parents. 8-year-old Felipe Alonso Gomez died on Tuesday after showing signs of a potential illness and being taken to a hospital in New Mexico. He was diagnosed with a cold and a fever and sent back into custody, but was soon returned to the hospital with nausea and vomiting. He died just hours later. U.S. immigration authorities said the cause of the boy's death has not yet been determined. U.S. immigration officers have left over 400 undocumented migrants outside a bus terminal in the city of El Paso without notifying shelters. Immigration and Customs Enforcement officers began dropping off migrants held in detention on Sunday night at the bus station without notifying local shelters, which usually take in large groups of asylum seekers. The total number of people left outside could exceed 800 by Wednesday. Local organizations have managed to house the people released so far. The government of Mexico has created an investigation team to determine the cause of the helicopter crash that killed the governor of Puebla and her husband. It has already requested the support of the U.S. National Transportation Safety Board. Mexican authorities have ruled out the presence of explosives in the crashed helicopter. Governor Erika Alonso and former Governor and Senator Rafael Moreno died on Monday along with 2 pilots and the governor's assistant.
After a thorough and careful analysis of the wreckage of the aircraft, they did not find any explosives or non-combustible substances that exploded inside the aircraft.
Let's hear from our correspondent Eduardo Martinez, who has more.
Unfortunately, we have to inform you that the helicopter of the governor of Puebla, Martha Erika Alonso, along with her husband, and 3 more people, including both pilots, crashed yesterday. State and federal authorities have said that a formal investigation is underway. Representatives of the aircraft's manufacturer have arrived in Mexico to collaborate with the investigation. The cause of the accident remains unknown. President Andrés Manuel Obrador has sent his condolences to the victims' families. Martha Erika Alonso was sworn in as the governor of Puebla on December 13th. Now, the Congress will call for extraordinary elections to elect the interim governor within 3 to 5 months.
And a vigil for the deceased couple has been held in Puebla. Relatives and friends gathered to say their last goodbye, as residents of the area hope to know the cause of the crash.
We want the truth. We want this to be clarified so we can be at ease, for everybody's sake, for the sake of Mexico, for the sake of the people in Puebla.
We have more stories coming up. We'll be back.
An occasion to enjoy the cultural diversity that defines our South American essence. Come along to find out the story behind these personalities, traditions, and artistic expressions that unite us as a whole. Real Lives. Friday. Only on Telesur.
Welcome back. An Argentinian woman and her 9-year-old son have been freed from captivity after 32 years in Bolivia. The woman was abducted when she was 13 by human traffickers in her hometown of Mar del Plata. She was finally found thanks to a tip received by police earlier this year. The mother and son were rescued in a joint operation between Argentinian and Bolivian police in the border town of Bermejo on Sunday. They have been reunited with their family in Argentina. And as 2018 comes to a close, we are taking a look at some of the biggest stories of the past year. This time we look at Venezuela, where President Nicolás Maduro will be sworn in for another term on January 10. Last year saw peace return to the country's streets and successful elections after over 2 years of violent protests and plots to overthrow the government. However, the country continues to face the task of economic recovery and international financial sanctions.
2018 was the year the Bolivarian movement reasserted its leading role at the ballot box, and Venezuela's political opposition collapsed. While the economic attacks from at home and abroad, what Chavistas call the economic war, remained the big, outstanding challenge. From before dawn on May the 20th, Venezuelan voters danced their way into their 24th election in 19 years of revolution, this time for president. Especially in poor neighborhoods, lines formed early outside polling stations. Chavistas like to think of their voting system as one of the most inclusive and transparent there is. They're fond of quoting Jimmy Carter, who once called this electronic ballot the best in the world. And this time, it incorporated additional safeguards requested by the opposition.
We're used to voting for democracy, and we vote with conviction for our country and for peace. It is second nature to us now.
Todos los expertos electorales, organismos electorales del continente.
All of the expert electoral bodies of the continent have been witness, since 2004, to the way we have automated the electoral process and implemented ever greater guarantees so that the electorate can trust their electoral system.
Before midnight, the victory was clear enough.
Thank you for supporting me during these tough times. And thank you for electing me President of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela for the period 2019 to 2025.
But the road to this political success had not been easy. After Venezuela's opposition parties won control of the National Assembly in December 2015, they proposed a three-pronged strategy to get rid of the Bolivarian government. Street protests, increasingly violent ones, were intended to bring down the government. They also called for a recall referendum to remove President Nicolas Maduro. And they insisted on immediate presidential elections. By May 2017, with the election of a constituent assembly, the first two plans had failed. The opposition was left with its call for an immediate presidential election. They said they couldn't wait until the scheduled date of December 2018. The government launched a new attempt at dialogue in the Dominican Republic, mediated by the former Spanish Premier José Luis Rodríguez Zapatero. In December 2017, the opposition finally joined the talks. By February, the two sides seemed to have reached an agreement, which had elections as one central point. But at the last minute, the opposition pulled out, allegedly after a call from the US State Department.
The
Santo Domingo Agreement, the agreement of democratic and peaceful coexistence, was not signed by the opposition at the very last moment. What is more, it included as a new element the bringing forward of the elections, which the opposition agreed to. In fact, they asked for it. But then the government asked if they were ready to guarantee that they would recognize the results.
In spite of all the guarantees, the opposition now decided it would boycott the elections unless they were moved back to December, the date they'd previously rejected. President Maduro said he would implement the agreement anyway, including the extra electoral safeguards. As the campaign warmed up, the traditional parties of the opposition became increasingly irrelevant. They could barely bring a few hundred onto the streets for the main march in favor of their boycott. But other opposition figures tried to fill the vacuum. Henry Falcón presented himself as a man of the people, pressing the flesh and promising to dollarize the economy. He appealed to the many opposition supporters who wanted to vote. For a while, he seemed to be gaining ground on President Maduro.
What does the country want? What do the majority of Venezuelans want? To change the government. That Nicolás Maduro should go and let us Venezuelans rebuild our country in peace.
While the pastor, Javier Bertucci, appealed to his evangelical base, handing out bowls of soup to anyone who was prepared to listen. It certainly looked like a real campaign. Yet the European Union, like the United States and many of its allies in Latin America, continued to question the legitimacy of these elections and even refused to recognize them, drawing scorn from the man who had done so much to broker a deal with the opposition.
Today we were at the Electoral Council, and the representative of the opposition, Mr. Rondon, told us that the conditions for these elections are the same as in December 2015, when the opposition won by 2 million votes.
A day after the victory, the United States announced new sanctions against Venezuela. It was clear that the challenge ahead would be economic, with a concerted attempt by the US and its allies to strangle the Bolivarian revolution.
They will create serious, painful difficulties for us that we will face gradually. But we will overcome and we will defeat. I have no doubt, dear compatriots, Mr. Trump's sanctions will be annulled and defeated.
A massive media campaign unfolded around the flow of migrants out of Venezuela, depicted as akin to humanitarian crises in Syria or Somalia, and in need of some sort of outside intervention. The reality was somewhat different. Hundreds of thousands have left Venezuela in the last 2 years, but they were hardly fleeing famine or persecution. What they wanted was dollars. There were now far fewer shortages of basic goods in Venezuela than in 2016 or 2017. The problem was this: paying for them. With runaway inflation and a dearth of cash, now aggravated by a harsh international financial blockade, migrants left in search of dollars to support their families. That's why the government put currency reform at the center of its recovery program, to try to escape the domination of the dollar. It introduced a new sovereign bolivar pegged to a new cryptocurrency, the petro, itself tied to the price of oil. And to outflank the economic siege imposed from the north, the government sought to strengthen its other international alliances and promote non-traditional mineral exports like cobalt and gold. All this is still work in progress. But by the end of the year, it seemed to be enough to persuade over 11,000 Venezuelan migrants to return home. When the government laid on the planes, they leapt at the chance. Many thought they'd be better off back home than being unemployed or super exploited in Lima, Quito, Santiago or Bogotá.
A lot of discrimination. We were humiliated. Some kids even spat on my sons. That was a trigger to return to my country.
De verdad, la xenofobia es, o sea, no nos aceptaba en ningún trabajo, al menos.
There's a lot of racism against Venezuelans. I couldn't get a decent job unless I was working in a market carrying 120 kilo bags. I should have never left the country, never.
Resistance and the fight for recovery also came from below. The twice-monthly box of provisions from local food committees continued to provide a lifeline for most Venezuelan families. Some supplemented it by growing beans on their roofs.
I choose seeds from the beans in the food parcel. I sow them, and that gives me between 1 kilo and 1.5 kilos of beans. That way, we get used to producing our own food. Some plant beans, some plant tomatoes, others peppers, and then we can exchange them with our neighbors.
Others took classes in cooking with unconventional ingredients.
If we don't have flour, we make arepas with carrots. That is what this alternative cookery is teaching us. And we work with vegetables, which we hardly used before, and they are full of vitamins.
While community organizations like this one in Antímano took over abandoned plants to produce basic goods in short supply. In this case, soap. In the face of such real difficulties, one thing stood out: the surprising, even extraordinary capacity of the Venezuelan people to face the future with optimism, high spirits and commitment.
Tell the world that Venezuela has gold. This is gold. The people are gold.
One more sign that, contrary to what many believe, the Bolivarian revolution remains very much alive.
The opposition in the Democratic Republic of Congo is demanding the Electoral Board deactivate SIM cards in voting machines. They say this would prevent the electronic transmission of results. Disputes about the untested machines have stoked tensions ahead of Sunday's long-anticipated elections.
The CENI has not deployed electoral material across the whole of the Republic, contrary to the information the CENI has given to the population. The material has not been deployed. You have a machine that arrives in one main place, but then has to be sent 200 kilometers away, and it's not there yet, just a few days before the election. That means what? It means that CENI is preparing for a chaotic election. First hypothesis, or to postpone them.
Security forces in Sudan have dispersed dozens of protesters who were marching to the presidential palace. They fired tear gas and shots in the air to disperse groups that gather at several spots in the capital, Khartoum. This comes after a week of protests against the country's deteriorating economy and the 3-decade rule of President Omar al-Bashir. And And Tunisian protesters have clashed with police in a demonstration after a journalist set himself ablaze. Police fired tear gas at dozens of people who took to the streets in the western city of Kasserine. 6 members of the security forces were injured and 9 protesters were detained. Protesters say they are angry about harsh living conditions in the country. We're taking one last break, but stay with us. Welcome back. Indonesian authorities have warned of possible extreme weather and high waves in the tsunami-hit area of Western Java. As volcanic activity continued in the area, Indonesia's Meteorology and Geophysical Agency said that a new tsunami could arrive soon near the Anak Krakatau volcano. A 2-kilometer exclusion zone has been set up around the volcano. And following this announcement, panic spread at an Indonesian town. Hundreds attempted to flee the Sumber Java village after word spread that another tsunami was about to hit. People ran trying to reach higher ground as sea level rose. And over 1,000 tsunami survivors are staying in this futsal stadium for shelter. The temporary shelter is housing residents whose homes have been affected or which are at risk. Many say they will stay until officials confirm it is safe to return home. The death toll of the tsunami has so far risen to 429.
My house actually is not really damaged, but my kiosk on the beachfront is destroyed.
Are you staying here? Why is that if your house is not really damaged?
I will stay here as I feel really scared. I will wait until the government says the situation is totally safe for us.
Syrian air defense systems repelled an Israeli aggression in the sky above the capital Damascus on Tuesday. Syrian TV said that a number of hostile targets were downed. An Israeli spokeswoman declined to comment on the reports. This comes as Israel has carried out a number of recent airstrikes on Syria. Orthodox Christians in Syria have attended a traditional Christmas Mass, the first to be held during peacetime in 7 years. The faithful gathered to pray at the Church of the Virgin Mary in the city of Kamichli. This area is under the control by the Arab-Kurdish coalition of the Syrian Democratic Forces. They have been fighting the Islamic State and other fundamentalist groups since the start of the civil war. And with that, we come to the end of this news brief, but this and other stories, you can find them on our website at telesurenglish.net. For our viewers in Africa, we are on Starsat channel 461 in South Africa and 539 in Nigeria, and we're on social media as well. For Telesur English, I'm Carla Gonzalez. Thank you for watching.